5 Centuries of Shadows, Gollum's tormented existence with the One Ring. Chapter 1, The Subterranean Sovereign. In the inky blackness of the misty mountain's depths, a creature stirred. Gollum, once known as Sméagol, slithered through the winding tunnels of his underground kingdom. His pale, luminous eyes pierced the darkness, seeking any sign of intrusion into his domain.
Precious, we are safe here. Yes, we are.
His voice echoed off the damp stone walls, a discordant melody in the silent caverns. Suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears, the scraping of boots on rock, the murmur of gruff voices.
What's this, Precious? Intruders in our home.
With uncanny agility, Gollum scrambled up a nearby wall, clinging to the shadows as he observed a group of dwarves stumbling into his lair. Their beards were matted with rain, their cloaks heavy with moisture.
We'll rest here for the night. This cave seems dry enough.
Gollum's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam flickering in their depths. He watched as the dwarves settled in, unpacking their supplies and laying out bedrolls.
Foolish dwarves. They comes into our home, they does. But we'll teach them.
As the night wore on and the dwarves fell into an uneasy sleep, Gollum crept closer. His fingers, long and nimble from years of scrabbling in the dark, deftly rifled to their packs.
Look, Precious, shiny things, tasty morsels, all for us.
He pocketed a few trinkets and a handful of dried meat, his mouth watering at the unfamiliar taste. As dawn approached, Gollum retreated to the shadows, leaving the dwarves to wait to their depleted supplies.
By Durin's beard, we've been robbed. Impossible. No one could have found us here.
Gollum watched their confusion with glee, a plan forming in his fractured mind. He scuttled deeper into the caves, his fingers tracing patterns on the damp walls.
We'll play a game, Precious. A game of riddles and rhymes.
With a jagged stone, he began to carve cryptic messages into the rock face, leading the dwarves further into his labyrinthine domain.
Look here. Strange markings. Some kind of code. Can you decipher it? It seems to be a riddle. Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters.
The dwarves huddled together, their voices hushed as they debated the meaning of the riddle. Gollum watched from above, his eyes glowing with malicious anticipation.
Wind! It's wind, stupid fat dwarves.
But his voice was too soft for the dwarves to hear. They pressed on, following the trail of riddles deeper into the mountain's heart. As the hours stretched into days, their supplies dwindled and tempers frayed.
This is madness. We're going in circles. Keep your voice down. Whatever left these riddles might still be nearby.
Narasix's Gollum reveled in their growing fear, his two personalities warring within him.
Perhaps we should help them, show them the way out. No, stupid Sméagol. We plays with them, we does. Then we eats them.
The internal struggle raged on, but Gollum's darker nature won out.
Time to end the game, Precious. Time to claim our prize.
As the dwarves reached a vast cavern, lit dimly by phosphorescent fungi, Gollum revealed himself. He dropped from the ceiling, landing with cat-like grace before the startled group.
Lost are we, poor little dwarves. So far from home.
What manner of creature are you?
What are we? We are Gollum, and this is our home. You trespass, you do.
Stand aside, beast. We'll cut our way out if we must.
Gollum's laugh echoed through the cavern, a chilling sound that froze the dwarves in place.
Cut your way out. Oh, no. First, you must play the game. Answer our riddles, and we shows you the way. Fail and... well, we gets hungry, we does. The
dwarves, trapped and desperate, saw no choice but to accept. Gollum's eyes gleamed with triumph as he began his deadly game of wits.
What has roots as nobody sees is taller than trees. Up it goes, and yet never grows.
The battle of riddles raged on, each question more cryptic than the last. But Gollum's centuries in the dark had honed his mind to a razor's edge. One by one, the dwarfs fell silent, unable to match his cunning.
Time's up, Precious. We wins, we does.
With inhuman speed, Gollum pounced. The cavern echoed with screams, quickly silenced. When stillness returned, Gollum stood alone, his prize claimed. The terror of the deep places had cemented his reign, and the shadows of the misty mountains grew ever darker. The cavernous depths of the misty mountains had long known only one master, a creature of shadow and malice, whose very name was but a whisper on the lips of those unfortunate enough to stumble into his domain. Gollum, once Sméagol, now a being twisted by centuries of isolation and the corrupting influence of the One Ring, reigned supreme in this lightless realm. But the tides of fate are ever-changing, and even the most secluded corners of Middle-earth cannot remain untouched by the conflicts that rage beyond. On a day indistinguishable from countless others in the perpetual gloom, the rhythmic drip of water and the occasional skitter of unseen creatures were shattered by a cacophony that echoed through the winding tunnels.
What's this noise, Precious? What's this racket that disturbs our peace?
The sound grew louder, a discordant symphony of shrieks, clanging metal, and the pounding of countless feet upon stone. Gollum's luminous eyes widened in a mixture of fear and curiosity as he crept towards the source of the commotion. Rounding a bend in the tunnel, he beheld a sight that sent him scurrying back into the shadows. A horde of goblins, their misshapen forms silhouetted against the flickering light of crude torches, poured into his sanctuary like a foul tide. Their eyes, accustomed to the dim light of their own caves, darted about wildly, searching for unseen threats.
Quickly, you maggots. The pointy ears are right behind us. Spread out and secure these tunnels. This will be our new home, away from those accursed elves.
Gollum's mind raced, his two personalities warring for dominance in the face of this unexpected invasion.
No. They'll ruin everything. Precious. Our home, our fishing spots, our lovely dark places. But we can't fight them all. Precious. There's too many.
For the first time in centuries, Gollum felt the icy grip of fear. The goblins' numbers were overwhelming, their crude weapons and armor a stark contrast to his own frail form. With a hiss of frustration, he retreated deeper into the maze of tunnels he called home, his mind already plotting and scheming. Days passed, and the goblins spread through the caverns like a pestilence. They defiled the pristine pools with their filth, carved crude dwellings into the living rock, and filled the air with their harsh language and raucous laughter. Gollum watched from the shadows, his hatred growing with each passing moment.
We hate them, Precious. Yes, we hate them forever.
But as the initial shock of the invasion wore off, a new emotion began to take root in Gollum's fractured psyche, a perverse excitement. For too long, he had hunted only mindless creatures of the deep. Now, a new game presented itself, one that stirred memories of his past triumphs and awakened a hunger for more than just fish and goblins. Under the cover of darkness, Gollum began his campaign of terror. His first victim was a lone goblin scout, separated from his fellows in the twisting tunnels. With the ring's power of invisibility, Gollum stalked the unfortunate creature, his footsteps masked by the constant drip of water from the cavern ceiling.
Who's there? Show yourself, you coward.
The goblin's voice echoed off the stone walls, betraying his growing fear. Gollum's lips curled into a grotesque smile as he circled his prey, savoring the moment.
Is it lost, Precious? Poor little goblin? All alone in the dark?
The goblin whirled, his crude sword slashing at empty air. Gollum's laughter, a sound like rocks grating against each other, seemed to come from everywhere at once.
We will show it the way out. Yes, Precious. The way to the deep, dark places where no one ever comes back.
With a speed belying his emaciated form, Gollum struck, his long fingers wrapped around the goblin's throat, choking off its scream. In moments, it was over, and Gollum dragged his prize into the depths, leaving no trace behind. As days turned to weeks, Gollum's guerrilla war against the invaders intensified. He became a phantom, a legend whispered around goblin campfires. Those who wandered too far from the main encampments disappeared without a trace, their fate known only to the creature who stalked the shadows.
I'm telling you, there's something out there, something that ain't natural. Shut your gob. There's nothing in these caves but rocks and darkness. You're jumping at shadows.
But even as the goblin leaders dismissed the fears of their underlings, doubt began to gnaw at their minds. Traps appeared as if by magic, pitfalls hidden beneath a thin crust of stone, rock slides that buried entire patrols, and treacherous paths that led to underground rivers, swift enough to sweep away even the strongest swimmer. Gollum reveled in his new role as the terror of the deep places. His two personalities, LOTR, found a strange unity in the thrill of the hunt. He developed new skills, honing his already formidable talents to a razor's edge. One of his most effective weapons was his ability to mimic voices. He would lurk in the darkness, calling out in perfect imitations of goblin speech, luring unsuspecting victims away from safety.
Help! I'm trapped down here!
And when the would-be rescuers arrived, they found only darkness and death waiting for them. As the conflict escalated, the goblins grew increasingly paranoid. They huddled in larger groups, rarely venturing into the unexplored areas of the cave system. But this only made Gollum bolder, his attacks growing more daring with each success. The war reached its zenith on a night when the goblin chieftain, secure in his belief that his central encampment was safe, slept soundly in his crude throne room. Gollum, invisible and silent as a ghost, crept past the guards and into the heart of enemy territory. The chieftain's crown, a grotesque circlet of black iron set with uncut gems, rested on a nearby stone.
A gift for us, precious. A pretty crown for the true king of the deep.
As he slipped away, crown in hand, Gollum couldn't resist a final act of defiance. He leaned close to the sleeping chieftain's ear and whispered in a voice that would haunt the goblin's nightmares for years to come.
The darkness claims all in the end, Goblin King. Best run back to the light while you still can.
The theft of the crown was the final blow to goblin morale. Whispers of curses and cave demons spread like wildfire through their ranks. Within days, the invaders began to abandon their new home, fleeing back to the world above. Watched from the shadows as the last stragglers departed, their torches flickering out of sight around a distant bend. As silence once again descended upon his domain, he felt a mixture of triumph and something almost like regret.
We won, precious. We drove them out. Yes, we did. But now we're alone again. All alone in the dark.
But as Gollum retreated to the deepest recesses of his lair, the stolen crown clutched to his chest. A new fire burned in his eyes. He had tasted victory, had matched wits against a worthy foe, and emerged victorious. And deep in his twisted heart, a part of him longed for the next challenge, the next intruder foolish enough to enter his realm. For now, Gollum was once again the sole master of his dark domain. But the echoes of the Goblin War would linger, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, change was possible. Chapter 3: The Echoes of the Past. Deep within the labyrinthine caverns of the Misty Mountains, Gollum's solitary existence was about to be shattered. The earth trembled, a low rumble that quickly escalated into a deafening roar. Stalactites crashed to the ground, shattering into countless shards. Fissures spider-webbed across the cavern walls, and the very air seemed to vibrate with primal energy.
What's happening, precious? The mountain, it moves.
Gollum scurried through the chaos, his emaciated form darting between falling rocks with preternatural agility. The quake's fury intensified, and entire sections of the cavern collapsed, revealing passages that had been sealed for millennia. As abruptly as it began, the earthquake subsided. The echoes of its fury faded, leaving behind an altered landscape. Gollum emerged from his hiding place, his luminous eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity.
New tunnels, yes. New places to explore, but dangerous. Precious. Very dangerous.
As Gollum picked his way through the debris, something caught his eye, a glint of metal amidst the stone. With trembling fingers, he brushed away the dust, revealing an object that seemed to defy the very darkness of his realm. An ancient elven sword lay before him, its blade untarnished by the passage of time. A soft, silvery radiance emanated from its surface, casting eerie shadows across Gollum's gaunt features.
What's this, my precious? A shiny thing, yes, but it hurts our eyes.
Gollum recoiled, shielding his light-starved eyes from the sword's glow. Yet, despite the discomfort, he found himself drawn to it. The blade seemed to whisper to him, stirring long, dormant recollections of a life before the darkness.
We remembers, doesn't we? The sun on our skin, the taste of fresh fish. No, he hates it. We hates the light.
The two warring halves of his fractured psyche clashed, their argument echoing through the empty caverns. Sméagol, the remnant of his former self, yearned for the memories the sword evoked. Gollum, the creature born of centuries in darkness, recoiled from them. 6 days passed, perhaps weeks. Time held little meaning in the lightless depths. Gollum found himself returning to the sword, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't understand. Each encounter left him more agitated, more conflicted.
Maybe we should take it with us. Precious. It might be useful. No, it hurts us. Leave it, leave it, leave.
The internal struggle intensified, Gollum's behavior growing more erratic with each passing day. He began to leave the safety of his deepest layers, venturing into areas he had long avoided. One day, driven by an impulse he couldn't explain, Gollum ventured into one of the newly opened tunnels. The passage twisted and turned, leading him closer to the surface than he had dared to go in centuries.
We're only going, Precious. This isn't safe. No, not safe at all. We must see, must know what's out there.
As he crept along, his keen senses detected unfamiliar scents and sounds. Strange creatures skittered in the shadows, their forms unlike anything he had encountered in his subterranean domain. In a chamber bathed in faint-filtered sunlight, Gollum discovered remnants of a forgotten age. Crumbling statues of elven warriors stood sentinel over long-abandoned treasures. Faded tapestries depicted scenes of battles and revelry, their once vibrant colors muted by the passage of time.
Look, Precious, we knows these things. We remembers. Lies, tricksy memories they are. We belongs to the dark.
Each new discovery further fractured Gollum's already fragile psyche. The memories of Sméagol surged forth with increasing frequency, challenging the dominance of the Gollum personality. As the internal struggle intensified, Gollum's behavior grew more erratic. His hunts became riskier, driven by a recklessness born of inner turmoil. He ventured into unexplored caverns, scaling treacherous rock faces and plunging into icy underground streams.
We must find food, Precious. The fishes are scarce in the old places. Perhaps we can try fishing in the sunlight again, like we used to. Stupid Sméagol! The sun will burn us. Yes, it will.
One day, Gollum's wanderings led him to a vast underground lake he had never seen before. The water was crystal clear, unlike the murky pools he was accustomed to. As he approached the shore, his reflection caught him off guard. Awed. For the first time in centuries, Gollum truly saw himself. The creature staring back at him was a far cry from the hobbit he had once been. His eyes, once a warm brown, now glowed with an unnatural light. His skin was pale and stretched tight over protruding bones, and his teeth, sharp and yellowed, more suited to a predator than a simple river folk.
What have we become? What? We are perfect, Precious. Perfect for the dark, for hunting, for surviving.
The sight of his reflection triggered a cascade of memories. Flashes of a life, long-forgotten family, friends, laughter, and warmth. But with those memories came pain, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions, Gollum fled from the lake, retreating to the familiar darkness of his lair. But the image of his reflection haunted him, refusing to fade from his mind's eye. In the days that followed, Gollum's internal struggle reached a fever pitch. The Sméagol personality, emboldened by the resurfaced memories, fought for control with renewed vigor.
We can leave this place, Precious. Find others like us, maybe even family. No, they would take the Precious from us. We must stay, must protect it.
As the two halves of his psyche warred, Gollum's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. He would spend hours staring at the elven sword, alternately reaching for it and recoiling in fear. His hunting patterns became erratic, sometimes venturing dangerously close to the surface world. One day, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, Gollum climbed higher than he had in centuries. The air grew fresher, and a faint glimmer of natural light beckoned from above.
Just a little further, we could see the sky again. No, the light will blind us, both us.
But despite Gollum's protests, Sméagol's influence pushed them onward. As they neared the surface, the sound of rushing water grew louder. Suddenly, they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a vast chasm. A waterfall thundered nearby, its spray creating a fine mist in the air. And above, a patch of star-studded sky peeked through an opening in the mountain. Gollum's eyes, so accustomed to darkness, watered painfully in the starlight. But Sméagol wept with joy.
Beautiful. So beautiful. It hurts us. We must go back to the dark.
For a moment, Sméagol's will held sway. They remained on the ledge, drinking in the sight of the stars, the feel of the mist on their skin. A distant howl echoed through the night, snapping Gollum back to his senses. With a snarl of fear and anger, he retreated into the mountain, fleeing back to the comforting darkness of his lair. In the days that followed, Gollum's internal conflict raged stronger than ever. The taste of fresh air, the sight of the stars, had awakened something in Sméagol that refused to be silenced.
We could go back, just for a little while. Never. The precious keeps us safe. We stays in the dark.
But the seed had been planted. Though Gollum fought against it with all his might, a part of him longed for the world above. His hunts took him closer and closer to the surface, even as he told himself he was nearly expanding his territory. The elven sword, too, continued to haunt him. Its glow seemed to mark the darkness he clung to, a constant reminder of the life he had lost. As the weeks passed, Gollum's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would alternate between periods of manic activity, exploring new tunnels, hunting with reckless abandon, and long stretches of brooding silence, huddled in the deepest, darkest corners of his lair. The two halves of his psyche warred constantly, leaving him exhausted and confused. Sometimes, in the depths of his madness, he would carry on entire conversations with himself, Sméagol and Gollum's voices echoing through the empty caverns.
We could be free. We could feel the sun again. The sun would burn us. Milk or net wood. But we're so lonely. Don't you remember having friends? Friends? Friends would steal the precious. We needs no one but ourselves.
As this internal struggle raged on, Gollum's world teetered on the brink of transformation. The comfortable routines of his solitary existence had been shattered, and a part of him knew that things could never go back to the way they were. One night, as Gollum perched on the edge of his underground lake, staring at his reflection in the still water, a realization struck him. Something was coming, some great change that would alter the course of his life forever.
We feels it, precious. Something's coming, but what? Maybe it's time to leave, to see what's out there. No, we stays here. We waits. Whatever comes, we'll be ready.
And so Gollum waited, his eyes gleaming in the darkness, scanned the shadows for any sign of intrusion, his ears strained for the slightest sound out of place. And deep in his twisted heart, a mixture of fear and anticipation grew. For Gollum knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that his long isolation was coming to an end. The outside world, which he had shunned for so long, was about to intrude upon his domain once more. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again.